The age of empires is fading. Before it's gone, let's look back at the wars of decolonization, struggles that shattered empires and ignited new nations. Today, we'll explore the 10 that set it ablaze. For centuries, vast powers carved up the world, but their grip was never absolute. From the mountains of Chechnya to the jungles of Vietnam, people rose up. These weren't just battles. They were turning points that reshaped our modern world and what we know today. Before our top 10, let's go ahead and honor the two standout fights. The Pueblo Revolt of 1680 saw Native American tribes in New Mexico unite, expelling Spanish colonizers in a bold uprising. Spaniards, at the time, bringing destruction and slavery, made it easy for these different indigenous groups, such as the Tiwa and the Caris, to unite together. Under the leadership of Pope, a Tiwa visionary, the indigenous people turned New Mexico's canyons and hidden trails into their stronghold. With coordinated attacks on isolated Spanish settlements, they left the colonizers defenseless. Overstretched and overwhelmed, the Spanish Empire had no choice but to retreat in defeat. And so, for the 12 years, the Pueblo people enjoyed a brief but significant period of independence and victory. The second honorable mention of this video goes to the Chichicmeca War. After the Spanish and their native allies toppled the Aztec Empire, they began to set their sights north. The Spaniards, upon hearing of silver mines and other resources north of Mexico City, expanded their empire into the current states of Guanajuato, San Luis Potosí, and Zacatecas. With little care of the native people already living in these lands, the Spanish erected villages, missions, and mining settlements, sending Spanish settlers to labor and exploit the land and also the indigenous people there. This would then ignite the 40 years Chichicmeca War, where the Spanish were once again over their head and fighting against nomadic indigenous people who were familiar with their lands and had skilled bowmen such as Guachichils who attacked and destroyed supply lines, causing further disruptions for the Spanish Empire. The war got so bad for the Spanish that they had to train indigenous allies on swords and riding horses. They eventually had to sue for peace, offering land and goods to end a war that the Spanish could not win. This highlights the Chichimeca's triumph in forcing a rare colonial concession. Moving on to the top 10 decolonial wars in history, starting at number 10, the 1857 Indian Rebellion. India, in 1857, was not a single nation, but a vast land controlled by the British East India Company, exploited by heavy taxes, stripped of land, and forced to serve in foreign wars. Indian soldiers and civilians had had enough. The tipping point was during an incident in the town called Meerut, north of New Delhi. Indian soldiers in the British East India Company's army were issued new Enfield rifles, which required soldiers to bite off the ends of paper cartridges to load them. Rumors were spread that these cartridges were greased with cow and pig fat. This deeply offended the religious sensibilities of both Hindu and Muslim Indian soldiers. When these Indian soldiers refused to use the cartridges due to these religious concerns, the British authorities responded harshly. The Indian soldiers that refused were court-martialed, publicly humiliated, and imprisoned for insubordination. This punishment was seen as unjust and insensitive. This eventually incensed other Indian soldiers, leading to a mutiny on May 10th, 1857. The mutineers freed the imprisoned soldiers, attacking British officers, and marched all the way to Delhi, triggering the widespread 1857 Indian Rebellion. The rebellion caught the British off guard. The British were deeply alarmed, as the rebellion threatened their entire colonial enterprise in India, a cornerstone of their global empire. Significant numbers of British soldiers were diverted to India, including regiments originally bound for other colonies. While the rebellion united diverse groups, Indian soldiers, peasants, and local rulers against British rule, thousands of Indian soldiers remained loyal to British, many of them consisting of Punjabi and Gurkha soldiers, aiding them in brutally suppressing the uprising by 1858. Though the rebellion was crushed, it shattered the myth of British invincibility, ending the East India Company's rule and leading to direct British crown control, making a turning point in India's struggle against imperialism. Number 9. The First Chechen War. After the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, new nations broke free, claiming independence. Among them was Chechnya, a small but fierce state in the North Caucasus region, determined to chart its own path. But the new Russian government had no intentions of letting go, setting the stage for a brutal war to crush Chechnya's dream. In 1994, Russia mobilized thousands of soldiers, rolling tanks and fighter jets into Chechnya to reclaim it. Yet the Chechen people, just 3 million strong, fought back with fierce determination. Armed with guns, anti-aircraft weapons, and other anti-tank missiles, and masters of their own mountainous, rugged terrain, they turned Russia's might against itself. Under the leadership of Dzhokhar-Dudayev, a Chechen ex-Soviet general, the Chechen people emerged victorious. In 1996, Russia was forced to sign the Khasavyurt Accord and withdraw after a grueling siege. But the triumph came at a steep cost. Tens of thousands dead, including many civilians, in a shattered land. The Russia would later reassert control. This war proved a small nation could beat a superpower. It's a testament that even the mightiest empires can stumble. Taking the 8th spot in this video is the Philippine Revolution. The Philippines was a territory that was under the administration of colonial Spain for over 300 years. Through mistreatment and forced labor and government mismanagement, the people of the Philippines had had enough. By 1896, under the direction of Emilio Aguinaldo, a powerful revolutionary, the people of the Philippines rose up and united, starting their war for independence. With guerrilla tactics and relentless resolve, they seized key towns and declared freedom in 1898. The Spanish Empire, overstretched, fractured, and already at war with the United States, the Spanish had no answer in their war against the Philippines, and by June 1898, the Philippines managed to declare its independence, beating the very people in war that colonized them for so many years. While this independence was extremely brief, as they eventually became a territory of the United States, this goes to show that when you have the determination and will to fight for your freedom, you often end up on the winning side in the history books. Number 7, the Angolan War for Independence. Portugal clung to its colonies longer than almost any other European empire. In Angola, over 400 years of Portuguese rule brought forced labor, racial segregation, and exploitation of land and resources. The call for freedom could no longer be silenced. In 1961, uprisings began in the countryside. Peasants attacked Portuguese plantations, demanding an end to colonial rule. What followed was a brutal guerrilla war fought by several liberation movements. From the jungles to the cities, Angolans carried out ambushes, sabotage, and hit-and-run tactics against Portuguese forces. Portugal responded with overwhelming violence, massacres, and napalm bombings. But the resistance did not break. The war dragged on for 13 years, draining Portugal economically and politically. Finally, in 1974, a revolution in Lisbon toppled Portugal's dictatorship, and the new government granted Angola independence. This war for independence showed that even one of Europe's oldest colonial empires could be brought down, not just on the battlefield, but by the will and determination of its people in the global tide of decolonization. Number 6, the Indonesian National Revolution. For more than 300 years, Indonesia was ruled as a Dutch colony, exploited for its spices, rubber, and wealth under harsh colonial rule. During World War II, Japan had taken Indonesia, beating the Dutch colonial forces. During the time of this occupation, the Japanese encouraged and fostered nationalist sentiments and organizations promoting independence and freedom, replacing much of the Dutch-created administrative and political infrastructure. When Japan surrendered in 1945, the Dutch intended to come back, restoring their colonial ways. But the Indonesian people seized their moment. The revolution, led by Sukarno and Muhammad Hatta, whom the Japanese promoted during their occupation, boldly declared their independence, igniting a 4-year struggle against the Dutch who tried to return. Indonesian fighters relied on guerrilla warfare. With little heavy equipment, they turned their knowledge of villages, jungles, and islands into a weapon. Ambushes, sabotages on railways, and surprise attacks wore down Dutch columns. The Indonesian Republic eventually gained international recognition, especially from the newly independent Asian nations and the United Nations. By 1949, exhausted by guerrilla war and international pressure, the Dutch conceded defeat and recognized Indonesia's independence. Number 5. The First Indochina War with France and Vietnam. Vietnam, once a proud kingdom with a rich history, fell under French rule in the 19th century. Its people subjugated and its resources plundered. By 1946, after World War II, after decades of colonial oppression, the Vietnamese had had enough. Led by Ho Chi Minh, they launched a war for independence, turning jungles into battlegrounds to reclaim their nation. The French had modern weapons, tanks, and air support, but the Vietnamese had something far more powerful: the will of the people, the mastery of guerrilla warfare. They struck from jungles and villages, ambushing French patrols and sabotaging supply lines. It was a war of endurance, and the French grew weaker with every passing year. The climax came in 1954 at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu, where Vietnamese forces surrounded and besieged a heavily fortified French base. After weeks of relentless assault, the French garrison surrendered, another mark in the history books of a European colonial power being decisively defeated in Asia by its colony. The Geneva Accords soon followed, ending French rule and dividing Vietnam temporarily at the 17th parallel. Though new struggles lay ahead, this war proved that even the strongest empires could be broken, and Vietnam's victory sent shockwaves across the colonized world. Taking the spot at number 4, the Algerian War for Independence. By the mid-20th century, Algeria was not just a colony, it was considered part of France itself. Over 1 million European settlers lived there, and the French government claimed Algeria would never be given up, but the indigenous Algerians, the majority population, lived in poverty, were denied rights, and subject to mass racial discrimination. They wanted freedom. In 1954, the National Liberation Front, the FLN, launched a coordinated uprising. Guerrilla fighters struck from the mountains and countryside, targeting French forces and settler infrastructure. The French army responded with overwhelming force. Torture, executions, and mass arrests became common. Entire villages were razed and destroyed. The war shocked the world for its brutality. Yet, this intense violence only deepened Algerian resolve. Urban uprisings, like the famous Battle of Algiers, showed that even in the heart of the colonial capital, resistance would not be silenced. Despite France deploying 500,000 French troops, the FLN endured. By the early 1960s, international opinion turned against France, and support for independence grew inside France itself. The Algerians united a diverse population: Arabs, Berbers, and urban intellectuals. Under the FLN's leadership, created a broad resistance movement. After 8 years of bloodshed and over 1 million deaths, the French government finally conceded. In 1962, Algeria declared independence, ending 132 years of colonial rule. This is one of the harshest wars of decolonization, but also one of the most decisive. This shows that the Algerians' willingness for freedom would not be stopped, even when France said that it was impossible. Number 3, the Second Sino-Japanese War. In 1937, as Japan grew and built its empire, it launched a full-scale invasion of China. For decades, Japan had been expanding its empire across Asia, Korea, Manchuria, Taiwan, but now it set its sights on the heart of China itself. The Second Sino-Japanese War had begun and would become one of the bloodiest struggles of the 20th century. China at the time was fractured between Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist government and Mao Zedong's communist government, but both agreed on one thing: resisting Japan. For 8 long years, Chinese soldiers and civilians fought side by side, often with outdated weapons, facing one of the most modern armies in the world. The cost was staggering. Multiple cities were bombed to ruins. Atrocities like the Nanjing Massacre and millions of lives were lost. This was a war of survival for the Chinese, as the Japanese military was ruthless, but China never surrendered. Guerrilla resistance in the countryside tied down Japanese forces, while mass mobilization turned ordinary farmers into fighters. With the support of its allies after 1941, China grew stronger. By 1945, towards the end of World War II, as Japan weakened under U.S. bombing and Soviet attacks, China reclaimed its land. The war left scars that remain to this day, but it also marked the rebirth of Chinese nationalism. It proved that under invasion and occupation, a people's will to resist could outlast an empire. The Second Sino-Japanese War was not just a chapter in World War II, it was one of the greatest anti-imperialist struggles in human history. At number 2, the Arauco War. When Spain toppled the greatest empires in the Americas, the Aztec and the Inca, it almost seemed unstoppable. In the southern part of Chile, the Spanish Empire found a people they could not defeat, the Mapuche. The war between the Spanish and the Mapuche began in the 1500s and would last for centuries. The Mapuche were fierce warriors. They mastered horses as soon as they arrived in the region, turning them into skilled cavalry to rival the Spanish. They learned to fight with lances, sabers, and even captured firearms. Their guerrilla tactics, ambushes, and relentless counterattacks kept Spanish forces at bay. In 1598, at the Battle of Curalaba, Mapuche fighters wiped out a Spanish governor and his forces, triggering one of the worst defeats Spain ever suffered in the Americas. Dozens of Spanish settlements south of the Biobío River were destroyed, and the Mapuche reasserted their independence. One of the well-known and iconic leaders of the Mapuche was Loturo, a young Mapuche captured by the Spanish and forced to serve as a page to Pedro de Valdivia, conquistador who founded Santiago in Chile. During his time as a page, he learned Spanish military tactics, cavalry use, and fortifications. He eventually escaped back and returned to the Mapuche, where he was chosen as a war leader. He unified different Mapuche factions and organized a powerful resistance. Eventually, he defeated Valdivia at the Battle of Tucapel, where the Spanish governor was killed. Loturo is often remembered as the most legendary Mapuche leader. Unlike the Aztec or Inca empires, the Mapuche had no capital to capture, no emperor to topple. Spain was forced into negotiations, and in 1641, the Parliament, Culion, formally recognized Mapuche autonomy, a rare case of European empires signing a treaty with indigenous Americans forced to recognize them as equals. The Arauco War continued in waves into the 1800s, but the Mapuche remained unconquered by Spain. For centuries, the Mapuche stood as proof that the Spanish Empire was not invincible, and that their defiance earned them a permanent place in the history of anti-imperialist struggle. Finally, at number 1, and in my opinion, the most deserving spot, is the Haitian Revolution. In the late 18th century, Saint-Dominique was the richest colony in the world, a jewel of the French Empire, built on the brutal labor of enslaved Africans. But in 1791, the enslaved themselves rose up. What followed was the only successful slave revolution in history and the birth of Haiti, the first black republic. The uprising was powerful. Plantations burned, slave masters fled, and tens of thousands joined the revolt. Leaders like Toussaint Louverture, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, and Henri Christophe turned rebellion into revolution, forging armies out of former slaves. They not only defeated the French, but also any Spanish or British forces that came to their aid. France, desperate to keep control, even sent Napoleon's brother-in-law with a massive expedition to retake the island. But yellow fever, brutal fighting, and Haitian determination destroyed them. The war was over. By 1804, the revolutionaries declared victory, and Haiti was free. The Haitian Revolution sent shockwaves around the world. It terrified slave-holding powers, inspired freedom movements, and proved that no empire, despite its size and all its manpower, was invincible. Haiti stood as the first nation born from a slave revolt, a beacon of anti-imperialism and the greatest decolonial war in history. This wraps up this channel's top 10 decolonial wars. If you have questions about the list, maybe perhaps recommending any suggestions, please feel free to leave a comment. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, and I look forward to making better content for you in the future. Thanks for watching.